What if the most powerful figure in the NFL right now wasn't even a head coach? Behind the scenes, while teams are scrambling to fill their top jobs, one man is quietly pulling strings that could reshape the league, and he's not wearing a headset on Sundays. Jim Schwartz isn't just building elite defenses anymore. Now, he's deciding who gets hired, who stays, and who develops the next face of the NFL, Shadur Sanders. And the wildest part, he's not even in charge officially. But the power he holds, it's unmatched, and the Browns know it. Because right now in Cleveland, they're not just looking for a coach, they're searching for someone who's willing to play by Schwartz's rules. Right now, Cleveland is sitting on one of the strangest, most strategic moves we've ever seen in an NFL coaching search. While 9 teams across the league are scrambling to fill their head coaching vacancies, the Browns are doing something no one expected. They're quietly telling candidates, "Yes, we want to hear your vision for the team, but you need to keep Jim Schwartz." Think about what that means. Imagine walking into a job interview for the highest position in an NFL organization, laying out your game plan, your culture-building strategy, how you'd manage quarterbacks, drafts, locker rooms, everything, only for the people across the table to say, "That's great, but we'd prefer not to touch our defense. You cool with that?" That's not a suggestion. That's an early condition. Jim Schwartz isn't the head coach, but he might as well be. The Browns are flat out telling head coach candidates that Schwartz needs to stay. Not as some kind of mentor in the front office, not as a consultant, but in full control of the defense he's already turned into one of the most feared units in the league. It's honestly unprecedented. Sure, you've seen organizations keep staff around when there's an internal promotion or when ownership is overly loyal to a longtime coach. But this isn't that. This isn't some legacy hire. This is a strategic, calculated decision based entirely on leverage, and Schwartz is the one holding all the cards. The crazy part is how bold the Browns are being. They're not sneaking it into late-stage conversations with candidates. They're saying it up front. According to reporting from Mary Kay Cabot, who's one of the most plugged-in reporters in Cleveland, they're interviewing offensive-minded guys, first-time candidates, big names, small names, but all with the same caveat: Jim Schwartz stays. Translation: you can run the show, just not the whole show. And that begs a much bigger question. If he's so critical to the future of the franchise, why is Schwartz just being considered for the head coaching gig himself? That's the elephant in the interview room. It's what candidates are thinking when they walk out. It's what fans are shouting about on social media. It's not a bad question either. If you trust him enough to anchor the defense, advise on quarterback development, and shape your roster's identity, why stop there? And the answer isn't simple. It's not about questioning Schwartz's leadership chops. This is a guy who commands respect across locker rooms, players follow him, and he has hardware to prove it. He's not just a guy doing well this season. This is someone who delivered a Super Bowl to Philly. That kind of resume should at least earn him a serious look at the top role. But here's the twist. This whole strategy, this entire chessboard that Cleveland is building, it's not just about keeping a great coordinator. It's about carefully constructing a future around a player they haven't even started yet, Shadur Sanders. And Jim Schwartz is quietly becoming the gatekeeper of that future. See, the Browns know what they have defensively. They were the number 4 ranked defense in the league this year, and the only reason they didn't completely fall apart in a season full of quarterback injuries, offensive stagnation, and locker room churn. While Deshaun Watson floundered and Dillon Gabriel barely got time, that defense kept the team afloat. So it makes sense they'd want to hold on to the man who built that wall. But it goes deeper. Because it's not just about maintaining stability, it's about buying time. Time for a young quarterback to develop the right way. Time to mask growing pains on offense with stops on defense. And everyone in that building, executives, coaching staff, maybe even ownership, is already looking at Shadur Sanders as the guy, even though you won't hear them say it out loud. Except they kind of are. When Mary Kay talked about the coaching search, she let something slip that was way more than just a casual mention. She said Cleveland is hoping some of these candidates come in, see Shadur's tape, and say, "This is your guy. We can build around him." That's a huge reveal. That's not the team poking around with possibilities. It's them trying to get validation for a decision that's already been made behind closed doors. They want a head coach who not only tolerates having Schwartz in the room, but respects him enough to partner with him. Someone who sees Shedur's potential and doesn't lobby for a veteran QB or draft a big name in the top 10 or push the Deshaun Watson experiment one more year just to save face. They want alignment. Fast. And that makes Jim Schwartz more than just a DC. They're building the entire coaching search around him. He has veto power. He has influence. And most importantly, he has leverage. Because if at any point he decides this setup doesn't work for him, if he gets a more appealing head coaching offer elsewhere, if Baltimore backs up a truck of money and gives him the top job, he's gone. And if he's gone, Cleveland's plan to build around Shedeur? Dead on arrival. That's why they're making it crystal clear. If you want to run the Cleveland Browns, you have to be okay running alongside Jim Schwartz. Because remove him from the equation, and everything else starts to fall apart. It's the obvious question. If Jim Schwartz is this influential, if he's the centerpiece of your team culture, the architect of your top-tier defense, and suddenly the guy every candidate has to work with, why not just slap the headset on him and make it official? Turns out, people inside the league want to know the same thing. Mary Kay Cabot, again, one of the most plugged-in Browns insiders, was straight up asked that question in a recent interview. If you want to keep Schwartz this badly, why not just hire him as head coach? And here's the thing, she didn't have a clear answer. Not because there isn't one, but because the real answer is messy. It doesn't fit inside a clean soundbite. It's not about resume or talent or experience. It's about fit and, more specifically, what Cleveland really wants to do at the quarterback position. See, Jim Schwartz has already proven he can lead. He's done the coordinator thing, done the ring thing. Won a Super Bowl in Philly. Remade Cleveland's defense into a nightmare for opposing quarterbacks. In the eyes of most around the league, he deserves a second shot at the top job. But the Browns aren't exactly looking for an experienced retread this time. They want someone who can walk in, develop a young quarterback, speak the modern offensive language, and bring balance to one of the most lopsided rosters in the NFL. They don't want to hand the keys to the franchise to a leader who's rooted in defense, not because he's the problem, but because the offense desperately needs the fix. It's that simple. Whispers out of the building suggest the front office has already made a decision, or at least a strong lean, toward building around Shadur Sanders. A quarterback who wasn't supposed to slip to the 5th round. A rookie with more talent than anyone wants to admit publicly, probably because teams slept on him. And now, he's the X factor in the entire coaching conversation. This is where it all gets interesting. Because if you hire Schwartz as head coach, you're now pairing a defensive-minded leader with a raw but promising quarterback. Sound familiar? Probably because that dynamic rarely works in today's NFL, where young QBs thrive with aggressive, creative offensive minds guiding their development from day one. That's why the Browns are dancing around the question. They can't hire Schwartz unless they're willing to accept that an outside offensive coordinator, not the head coach, will steer Shedur's growth. And they don't like that setup. It splits power. It creates tension. More importantly, it puts the most important player on the roster directly in the hands of someone who can leave in a year or two for a better job. So instead, what they're doing is the football version of threading a needle in a hurricane. They're trying to hire a head coach who is young, offensively gifted, forward-thinking, and open to sharing power with someone who might have more influence in the building than they do. That's a tough ask. What self-respecting head coach wants to come into a job knowing someone else already has the locker room's respect? That no matter what they say behind closed doors, every player on the defensive side of the ball is still looking to Schwartz. One executive reportedly compared it to handing someone the keys to a mansion and then telling them, by the way, the previous owner still lives in the basement, and he's not going anywhere. It's awkward, but it's also calculated. Cleveland doesn't want to waste another top draft pick chasing quarterbacks. They don't want to bench a talent like Sanders just to keep polishing the broken Watson project. And they definitely don't want to blow up their defense just because the coaching market got competitive. So they're gambling. They're betting they can find someone who not only wants the job on those terms, but sees potential in it. A true offensive mind who looks at the tape and says, yeah, I can work with Shedeur. I can teach him. I can build around him. And I don't see Schwartz as a threat, I see him as a complement. That's the dream scenario. But the longer this search goes, the clearer it becomes. Hiring Schwartz outright solves one problem, but creates another. It gives you leadership, continuity, and defensive dominance, but it might put you in the exact same position you're trying to escape, with no long-term quarterback plan. And that's why the Browns haven't pulled the trigger. As much as they love what he brings, as essential as he is to their short-term success, they know that building around Shedeur requires more than just stability. It requires vision. Alignment. Someone who speaks quarterback fluently, not just defense. It's not about whether Jim Schwartz is good enough to be a head coach. He is. He's proven that 10 times over. It's about whether he's the right head coach for what Cleveland is building right now. And that's the part fans don't always see. Schwartz could absolutely take the top job somewhere. Maybe even in Baltimore. But in Cleveland, he might be even more powerful without the title. Because while other teams are still figuring out who's in control, Jim Schwartz is already shaping the future from the shadows. And if you don't believe that, just ask every head coach candidate walking out of that interview room exactly who they were actually trying to convince. At the center of all this chaos, the interviews, the rumors, the coaching carousel, sits a rookie quarterback who barely touched the field last season. Shadur Sanders, not Deshaun Watson, not Dylan Gabriel, Shedeur. And if you're wondering how a fifth-round pick suddenly became the axis of power inside an entire NFL franchise, you're not alone. But make no mistake, behind the scenes, he's the reason this whole thing is happening the way it is. Here's what we know. Cleveland doesn't want to say it publicly. They can't, not without blowing up their quarterback room, inviting speculation, or making Watson's situation even more toxic. But internally, it's becoming clearer by the day. Shadur Sanders isn't their backup plan. He's the plan. He's the guy they want to build around quietly, without the media storm, the fan pressure, or the distractions that come from labeling a fifth-rounder franchise quarterback before he's even had a proper start. But how do we know that? Look at what's actually happening inside the building. Every single head coach candidate being interviewed is getting hit with the same set of questions. Not about scheme, not just about leadership, but about one very specific player. What do you think about Shadur Sanders? Do you believe he can be a starter? Can you build an offense around him? Those aren't casual questions. That's not due diligence. That's Cleveland fishing for confirmation. They're waiting for anyone, to sit down, look at the film, and say exactly what they've been hoping to hear. You've got something here. We don't need to draft another quarterback. We don't need to waste cap space on a struggling veteran. We can work with this. And why are they being so careful? Because this isn't a decision they can afford to get wrong. Deshaun Watson's contract is an anchor, a fully guaranteed mess. Dylan Gabriel isn't moving the needle. And drafting another young QB with the number 6 overall pick means resetting again, which is exactly what this team doesn't want to do, not after finally building a top-tier defense, not when the AFC North is as volatile as it's ever been. So instead, they're hoping to outsmart the system. They nailed a draft pick no one saw coming. They landed a player who dropped way too far and now has insiders whispering that he should have gone first round. A guy with high upside, leadership, and just enough intrigue to feel like a hidden gem. Better yet, he hasn't been broken by NFL pressure yet. No national humiliation, no fans calling for his head, just untapped potential, sitting quietly on the bench, waiting for someone to believe in him. And that belief, it has to come from the next head coach. This entire coaching search is designed to be a request for validation. Ownership has already made up their mind, or they're this close to it. But they won't pull the trigger unless the new hiring validates the move. Because once a head coach comes in and says, "I see a future in Shedeur," the organization suddenly has permission to reframe everything. That's not a late-round flyer anymore. That's a developmental franchise quarterback in waiting. And guess who knows all this? Jim Schwartz. He's not just overseeing the defense. He's shaping entire conversations about the offense without saying a word publicly. Because none of this works, none of it including the Shedeur plan, unless Schwartz is part of the puzzle. He's the glue that holds together the strategy. The guy who allows Cleveland to not chase the glamorous offensive big-name hire because they've already got part of the formula covered. Think about it. If Cleveland hires an offensive guy who believes in Shedeur and keeps Schwartz running the defense, they don't have to waste time. They don't need a bridge quarterback. They don't need to run a full rebuild. They've got a plug-and-play plan that starts immediately. Young quarterback, elite defense, offensive-minded head coach, and a front office finally aligned after years of missteps. That's the dream. But if just one of those pieces falls out of place, say Schwartz decides to walk, or the coach they hire doesn't think Shedeur has enough talent, then it all collapses. They're back to square one. And that's why these interview questions matter so much. They're trying to read between the lines. Is this candidate just telling them what they want to hear, or does he genuinely see Sanders as the future? Because it's not just about making a pick. It's about building an identity, a new era, one not defined by chaos at quarterback or endless reshuffling of the coaching staff, but by an unlikely duo, a raw, overlooked QB and a grizzled defensive coordinator with a chip on his shoulder. It's a strange combo, one nobody expected. But in today's NFL, strange is the new normal. And if Cleveland can get everyone on the same page, they might be looking at a reboot that no one else saw coming. Because sometimes, the most important player on your roster isn't the one throwing passes on Sunday. Sometimes, it's the one sitting in the interview room asking, "Can you see what we see?" While everyone's talking about who the Browns will hire, what nobody seems to be noticing is this. Jim Schwartz is already making NFL decisions like a head coach. Without the title, the press conferences, or the spotlight, he's not just influencing Cleveland's future, he's quietly holding it hostage. This is what makes the situation so insane. Right now, Schwartz is under contract. That means other teams can't just pluck him away for a defensive coordinator role, they'd have to offer him a head coaching job, which, by the way, is actually happening. Schwartz has already interviewed with the Baltimore Ravens. And they're not just kicking the tires either, they're interested. Baltimore knows exactly who he is. He coached there. He's part of that city's football DNA. He's watched the AFC North up close. Even more than that, he's dominated it with Cleveland's roster. So yeah, if you think the Ravens took that interview lightly, think again. And that's where things get real. Because now, Schwartz isn't just negotiating from a place of loyalty. He has leverage, massive leverage. He can stay in Cleveland as the most important defensive mind in the division, or he can take the ultimate revenge arc and head back to his old stomping grounds and possibly crush the Browns from the other side. That is terrifying for Cleveland's front office. If Schwartz walks, they're not losing just a coordinator. They're losing the engine that carried them through an entire miserable season on offense. When every other phase of their game was falling apart, it was Schwartz's defense turning games around, dragging them to the finish line, keeping them from absolute collapse. You don't just replace that, and the Browns know it. That's why they're playing this politically. Carefully. Everything about this coaching search is being shaped not just for what's best long-term, but for what keeps Schwartz in the building, because he can walk. And if he does, this plan to quietly build around Shadur Sanders suddenly feels like a fantasy. Because let's look at the ripple effect. If Schwartz stays, hear us what happens. You hire a smart offensive coach. Someone young, someone creative, someone who sees a future in Shedeur. Now, that coach doesn't need to win games on his own. He gets breathing room, because Schwartz's defense is holding opponents to 17 points or less. That gives your rookie quarterback a completely different development track than most. He's not expected to throw 40 times a game. He's positioned for growth, not desperation. But now play this out another way. What happens if Schwartz leaves for Baltimore, or worse, takes another job inside the division? Now Cleveland has to replace the single most reliable thing about their entire operation, their defensive dominance. And they have to do that while also onboarding a new head coach, deciding on a quarterback, and managing the Deshaun Watson fallout. That isn't just hitting the reset button. That's throwing the entire button board across the room. It's collapse waiting to happen. And here's the wildest part, Schwartz knows this. Completely. Fully. And he's using it perfectly. Not in a villainous way. Let us be clear, Schwartz isn't out here scheming with some big plan to overthrow the front office. He's earned this power. He built something great, he delivered on every expectation, and now he gets to cash in. The Browns can't back him into a corner. They can't go over his head. Everything, literally everything, has to go through him. So now, Cleveland is facing the most complicated coaching hire in franchise history, because it's not just about football, it's about power dynamics. They're not just trying to find someone who's qualified. They're trying to find someone smart enough to respect Schwartz, flexible enough to work with him, and confident enough to lead a franchise knowing he's sharing that power. And that person has to want to work with Shedeur, develop him, trust him, build a long-term program around him. Oh, and that person has to beat out 8 other NFL teams who are searching for coaches at the exact same time. That shrinks your list fast. Right now, it's almost like Schwartz gets final say on who becomes the head coach. That's how much weight he carries. That's how tight this window is. If Cleveland hires someone Schwartz isn't willing to work with, he's out. If they hire someone who doesn't believe in Shedeur, he's out. If they get it wrong, the whole roster starts leaking talent before the first snap of next season. So yeah, when people say Schwartz might be more powerful than most head coaches, they're underselling it. He's already functionally more powerful, because he holds both the what now and the what if in his hands. What happens now if he stays? The Browns have a shot to build something unique. What happens if he leaves? They lose the only identity they've had since this unstable rebuild started. It's all a giant, silent power play, and Schwartz is playing it better than anyone could have predicted. No press conferences, no public demands, no ego-driven rants on sports radio. Just quiet influence behind closed doors, shaping what could be the biggest fork in the road the Browns have faced in a decade. And right now, everyone in that building is hoping, praying, almost begging that Schwartz doesn't reach for the door. For anyone still wondering why Jim Schwartz has this much pull, here's the answer in one word: receipts. He didn't stumble into influence. He earned it the hard way, with results, with rings. With a defensive track record that very few in the league can even come close to, especially in the last decade. And the part that people seem to forget? This is a guy who's been doing this longer, and better than most of the head coaches being interviewed today. Let's rewind the clock. Back in 2017, Jim Schwartz was with the Philadelphia Eagles, running a defense that didn't just show up in the playoffs, it won the playoffs. He was the mastermind behind the defense that gave Tom Brady and the Patriots all they could handle in Super Bowl LII. While Nick Foles was out dueling a legend on offense, it was Schwartz's unit managing the chaos, making timely stops, and sealing one of the most surprising title runs in modern NFL history. And guess what happened when Schwartz left? The Eagles lost their edge. Not immediately. But over time, things changed. The identity shifted. The consistency fell off. And slowly, that championship-caliber toughness on defense faded. That's not a coincidence. That's what happens when you lose a coach who doesn't just design good plays, he builds a culture. Fast forward to Cleveland. Completely different team, completely different situation. But same Jim Schwartz. Last season, when he stepped in as defensive coordinator, no one was expecting miracles. The defense had talent, sure. Myles Garrett, Denzel Ward, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, but they were undisciplined. Wasted potential. Just another group on a middling team with no identity. Schwartz walked in and flipped the entire script. In one season, Cleveland's defense vaulted into the top 4 overall in the NFL. They led the league in fewest yards allowed per game. They were ranked number 1 against the pass, and maybe more importantly, they were consistent week in, week out, regardless of what was happening with the offense. And let's be honest, the offense was a dumpster fire. Deshaun Watson was injured and inconsistent. The revolving door of backup quarterbacks, Gabriel, DTR, never found a rhythm. The offensive line was banged up. The run game never really stabilized after Nick Chubb went down. But none of it mattered, because Schwartz's defense acted like a reset button. Every single game, they gave Cleveland a chance to win, even when the team couldn't move the ball 20 yards downfield. That kind of coaching, it doesn't happen by accident. It's not just scheme. A lot of guys can draw X's and O's. It's the way players respond to him. It's the culture he installs. It's how quickly he gets buy-in from veterans and rookies alike. He doesn't just walk into a locker room with his playbook. He walks in with credibility, war stories, a ring, and a chip on his shoulder the size of the entire AFC North. Even rival coaches are admitting it. Mike Tomlin reportedly told his staff that Cleveland's defense hits like a freight train and plays like they've already won the division. One anonymous offensive coordinator said, "That's not a top 5 defense, that's a top 1 defense, and it's not even close." When opposing teams are praising your DC, he's doing something right. And that's the part that makes this entire situation in Cleveland so complicated. Because Schwartz hasn't just earned the right to be respected, he's demanding it without demanding it. He isn't lobbying for the head coach job publicly. He's not politicking in the media. He doesn't need to. His work does the talking. And that's what makes it so difficult for Browns ownership to ignore. They've seen firsthand what he rebuilt. They watched what happened when almost everything else collapsed, and his defense kept them alive. And now, they know exactly what's at stake if he leaves. Because if he walks, they're not just losing a coach. They're losing the heartbeat of the entire team. That kind of coach doesn't come around often. And when he does, you don't let someone else be the reason you lose him. Part of why the Eagles seem to be kicking themselves right now is because they've been through this story before. They let him go, thinking their system could survive without him. For a while, maybe it did. But the cracks started showing later, when the noise died down and the defense started sliding. When they realized what they'd really lost wasn't just a coordinator, it was an anchor. Now they're watching him do it again, but in Cleveland, and in a much bigger role. Because this time, it's not just about defense, it's about team identity, leadership, momentum, Shadur Sanders, roster construction. It's about who stays, who goes, and who gets hired next. It's about whether Cleveland finally builds something sustainable or resets the clock again, hoping they get lucky the next time around. And Jim Schwartz, he's not waiting to be handed the head coach badge. He might not even want it. Because the truth is, he already holds more influence than some head coaches do. Without ever stepping up to the podium, without ever sending in the interview request, he's calling the shots. Silently, strategically, and on his terms. If there's one thing that's been quietly tearing the Cleveland Browns apart, it's not coaching, it's the quarterback room. On paper, Cleveland should have had this part of the roster figured out a long time ago. They traded away picks, money, credibility, you name it, for Deshaun Watson. The front office went all in, not just with hype, but with a fully guaranteed contract that reset the market and almost immediately became a nightmare. That deal is still hanging around the franchise like an expensive shadow. And the weight of it, you can feel it with every snap Watson takes. Except there haven't been many. Between injuries, inconsistencies, and flat-out embarrassing performances, Watson has delivered almost nothing close to what Cleveland paid for. And the fans know it. The locker room knows it. And deep down, the organization knows it too. But here's the problem, you can't bench a guy making that kind of money without catching fire on every level. So you keep him around, hoping something eventually clicks. It hasn't. Then Dillon Gabriel, the rookie. He got a couple reps, a few wild moments, and that's basically it. Not enough to evaluate, not bad enough to cut, just there, almost like he's part of the scenery more than the future. But then there's Shadur Sanders, the fifth-round guy with the first-round mechanics, the kid who sat patiently while the veterans stumbled, the one who analysts now say should never have dropped that low. While chaos unfolded on the offensive side of the ball, Shadur sat, watched, learned. And inside that building, people started whispering the same thing. Why aren't we giving him the shot? According to Mary Kay Cabot from Cleveland.com, the Browns are already asking head coaching candidates pointed questions about Shadur. Not Watson, not Gabriel. Shadur. They're not pitching him like a backup either. They're not asking, could he be a solid number 2? They're asking if these coaches can build a system around him, if they think he could be the face of the franchise. Nobody says that about a placeholder. That's what you say when you're testing the waters before going all in. And here's the detail nobody is talking about. When Cabot listed Cleveland's QB assets in an interview, she said, and I quote, "They've got Shadur, Watson, and the number 6 overall pick." She listed Shadur first. That's not a coincidence. That's a leak, the kind that comes straight from the top when a franchise wants to float a message without putting pen to paper. That one sentence did more than any press conference could. It told the league, Shadur is in the mix now, and maybe, just maybe, he's ahead. Look at the setup. Cleveland has the number 6 overall pick. If they wanted a quarterback, they could swing for it hard. A few trades, maybe move up. They could draft one of the hyped rookies coming out this year and start fresh in a clean way. But that would mean punting on Shadur entirely, tossing away a pick, and once again looking like they have no idea what direction they're going. Or they could roll with Shadur, build around him, lock in the defense with Schwartz. Find a coach who gets it, stabilizes the offense, and sparks the beginning of something real. The truth is, that's exactly what they're trying to do. They don't want to admit they failed with Watson. It's too messy. The contract, the headlines, the criticism. But they also know they can't trust him to build a future. So they've come up with a workaround. Don't announce it. Don't bench him outright. Just quietly install the next guy. Let the narrative shift organically. And Shadur, he's the perfect candidate. Young, underrated, no baggage, built for the long game. And with Schwartz holding that defense together, Shadur wouldn't have to do everything at once. He could slide into a role where he's protected, developed, supported, not thrown into the fire like so many rookies. He wouldn't need to be the savior, just solid, just promising, just enough to give the fan base hope without selling hype. That's why this coaching hire matters so much. They're not just looking for someone to call plays and wear the headset. They're looking for someone to co-sign Shadur. Someone to walk into the interview room, look at the tape, and say, he's more ready than people realize. Give me 6 months and I'll make him a star. Because if they find that coach, suddenly, you don't have to blow another early draft pick on a quarterback. You don't have to trade for a broken veteran. And most importantly, you don't have to keep pretending Deshaun Watson is going to turn things around. That's the unspoken truth behind this entire story. Cleveland isn't locked in a coaching search because they're panicking. They're searching because they're trying to build a pivot plan. One that's cleaner, cheaper, smarter, and already sitting on their bench in a number 5 jersey. And behind that plan, Jim Schwartz, holding it all in place. Because if Schwartz stays, they don't need an all-star head coach. They just need someone who sees what they see. Someone who sees Shedeur. But here's the part that should really scare Browns fans and maybe even people inside the building. What happens if Jim Schwartz leaves? Because all of this, the defense, the coaching search strategy, the Shedeur pivot plan, it's all built on an assumption. An unspoken, we'll figure out everything else as long as Schwartz stays. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if the Ravens don't just interview him, but offer him the head coaching job? He's already met with them. Baltimore knows who he is. They've watched him quietly dismantle the AFC North for a year. They've seen him push around their offense, disrupt their rhythm, and take a talent-heavy, inconsistent Cleveland team and make them feared again. You don't bring in someone like that for a formality. If they see him as the right fit, they're going to make a run at him. And the Browns, they can't match that offer. Because unless they're ready to hand him the head coaching title, which they clearly aren't, they don't have much left to offer. If Schwartz walks, Cleveland doesn't just lose a defensive coordinator. They lose their identity. Let's be clear, this team hasn't been built around offense in years. It hasn't been built around a franchise QB. It's been built around an elite, violent, perfectly schemed defense. The kind of unit that drags you into a 13-10 trench war and breaks your will quarter by quarter. That's Schwartz's blueprint. Rip the game away from skill players, force mistakes, dictate tempo. And now it's baked into this team's DNA. You take him away. You don't get to keep that edge. It doesn't stick around just because the jerseys look the same. And once that's gone, everything else gets harder fast. Suddenly, whoever takes over the head coaching job walks into a ticking time bomb. Because now the pressure isn't spread across 2 sides of the ball anymore, it's concentrated. All eyes shift to the quarterback, and suddenly Shadur Sanders isn't being treated like a developmental option with a cushion, he's the guy. The solution. The face of the franchise, overnight. And that's the nightmare scenario. Because even if Shedeur is the guy they believe in, asking him to get it all right from day one, under a new head coach, without the safety net of a dominant defense behind him, that's how you ruin a young quarterback. That's how you burn through another 5-year window and reset again with nothing to show for it. It also nukes their leverage. Right now, Cleveland has options. They can sell coaching candidates a stable setup, elite defense, a high-ceiling QB, no pressure to break the bank at the position. But without Schwartz, that entire pitch crumbles. They become just another team in full rebuild mode, hoping to strike gold with a first-time coach and a 5th-round quarterback no one else believed in. And don't forget, other teams are watching this unfold. The moment Schwartz's departure even feels real, rival GMs start circling. Players rethink re-signing. Free agents lose interest. Suddenly, Cleveland's got next becomes Cleveland just blew it again. This isn't just about strategy now, it's about optics, culture, control. It sends a message to the league. We had the guy and we let him walk again. That's why every move being made right now feels like a high-stakes game of chess. The Browns are working the sideline, trying to find an offensive coach who believes in Shedeur, while also meeting the unofficial requirement of keeping Schwartz happy enough to stay. And here's what makes that brutally difficult. You can't just hire someone because they say nice things about Schwartz in the interview. You have to find someone he respects. Someone he'd actually be willing to report to. Someone who doesn't walk in thinking, this is my team now, but is smart enough to know who really built the foundation. That's a short list. And Schwartz, he knows everyone on it. He knows who he'd trust, who he'd click with, who he'd block. If the front office picks the wrong name, he won't make a scene, he'll just leave. And with one move, the Browns go from most underrated roster in the AFC to back in the quarterback wilderness. So when you hear reports that Cleveland is being methodical or taking their time with interviews, it's not indecision. It's desperation disguised as strategy. They're trying to get this exact combination locked in. A coach who believes in Shedeur, is respected enough for Schwartz to stay, and has a vision that doesn't include wiping everything clean just to make it his team. Because if they miss on this hire, even slightly, they don't just lose Schwartz, they lose the plan. And once that plan falls apart, all that's left is another round of press conferences, rebuilding press releases, and fans screaming into the void about when this team is finally going to get it right. So when you strip away all the noise, the interviews, the speculation, the quarterback carousel, even the Deshaun Watson drama, what's left is a single truth. Jim Schwartz might be the most powerful non-head coach in the NFL. Not because he's loud, not because he makes headlines, not because he's begging for a promotion, but because he doesn't have to. In Cleveland, Schwartz has quietly become the kingmaker, the unspoken gatekeeper of the franchise's future. He's not handing in job applications, he's reviewing them. He's not asking for control, he already has it. No title required. And here's what makes it so fascinating. Every decision the Browns make from this point on who they hire, who they play, who they build around, runs through a man who isn't even named in those headlines. He's sitting behind the curtain, shaping the architecture of a team that feels like it's on the edge of something. Something real, something new, but only if they don't blow it. Because the future they want, the one that features Shadur Sanders confidently leading this team behind an elite defense with a modern, creative coach pulling the strings on offense, that dream only works if Schwartz stays. Without him, everything resets. The offense carries the pressure. Shedeur has no room to breathe. The new coach burns out under the weight of a fractured staff, and the Browns spiral again. But if Cleveland somehow pulls off the impossible, if they find the one coach who can walk in, build around Shedeur, and earn Schwartz's respect, then suddenly this broken franchise becomes one of the most dangerous teams in the AFC. Because now it's built on something solid. Now you've got a plan, you've got alignment, you've got a quarterback coming up the right way, and behind it all, you've got a coach who isn't chasing Twitter headlines or making bold promises, he's just building something that works. Think about that. How often do you see someone in the NFL with this much power without speaking a word? Jim Schwartz doesn't need to walk into a press room and declare his authority. He's already running the system. The Browns aren't just trying to build a contender, they're trying to build it with his approval. And whether he stays in Cleveland, walks to Baltimore, or takes a head coaching job somewhere else, one thing's already obvious. Wherever Jim Schwartz goes next, a franchise's future follows. So what do you think? Should the Browns just hand him the job? Or should they risk losing everything just to chase a new vision? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this isn't just a coaching search. This might be the biggest power shift in the NFL, and it's all happening before the first snap of next season.